The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. This is Celeste Jansen, and I'm the host for today's webinar. We're excited to have you for our second webinar in the Collaborative Mentoring webinar series. If you participated last month, you'll know we had a great discussion with David Dubois about his new meta-analysis, and you can find that webinar in its entirety on the Minnesota Mentoring Partnership's YouTube channel. This month, we've got a really exciting topic planned for you, and I am joined by three additional folks that are helping me organize this great webinar series. First, I'd like to introduce Michael Geringer from the National Mentoring Center. He's with us today, and he'll be interviewing our special guest. Welcome, Mike.
Great. Hi, everyone.
Also, Sarah Kramer from Friends for Youth is supporting us today, and she'll be working behind the scenes handling the questions that you type in. Sarah will respond or read them aloud. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks, Celeste. Glad to be here.
And finally, April Reardon from the Minnesota Mentoring Partnership will be adding resources and reminders in the chat feature of the webinar and also supporting with the questions. Welcome, April.
Hi, thank you.
Okay, many of you are familiar with webinars, but for those of you where this is new, this is just a reminder that everyone on the webinar is muted, and that helps us get the best possible sound. However, we still really do want to make this an interactive experience for you. So you can participate in three ways. First of all, on your screen there's a questions box, and in that questions box, feel free to type questions at any point throughout the webinar. Second, there's a chat feature that is also incorporated in this software, and if at any point there's a resource that's mentioned or something that we'd like to share with you, check out that chat feature and we might have some things posted. And then also there's a raise your hand feature. There's a little hand with an arrow that you can see displayed on your screen, and at any point if you want to type in questions, but if you've got anything that's a question that you'd like to verbally say, wait till the end and we'll have a live section towards the end if anybody's interested in asking a question. This is important. You've got to make sure that you're on a headset or a telephone, so you've got to make sure you have the technology to make sure that we can hear you. Before we get started into the meat of today's topic, we have a couple polls that we're going to launch. This is helpful for us to see who is participating. So first, what we want to know is how, with the number of people that are sitting at your computer participating in the webinar, how many are there? Is it just you, or are there multiple people sitting participating and listening to the information we'll share today? 75% have voted. Let's wait till it's a little bit more. And a couple more. Great. Let's close that poll now and we can see the results. The majority of individuals, 85%, are participating by yourself at your computer, but some of you are shared around a screen, and that's a great way for you to talk about what we're sharing and see how it applies to your program. So that's a great format, and we encourage that in the future. Okay, our next poll, let's launch. We'd love to know, what's your experience in the mentoring field? Are you a beginner, are you experienced, or would you describe yourself as an expert? Okay. Close this poll and share the results. So this is what we typically see. We have a mix of all three categories, but the majority of the folks on this field are experienced, and therefore we'll try and tailor that information to the folks who have been in mentoring for a while. Our last poll today is primary role is, do you work in a mentoring program? Are you a mentor, a researcher, a funder, or do you provide technical assistance to mentoring programs through a company or a nonprofit like a state partnership? Okay, let's close that poll and look at the results. So not surprisingly, the majority of folks on today's call work in a mentoring program, but 15% of us also provide technical assistance, and I'm excited to see that there is a mentor, a researcher, and a funder all on the line as well. Okay. So today I would like to introduce Dr. Roger Dura. He's a professor with the Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. His research on juvenile offenders motivated him to create a mentoring program to reduce recidivism. His Aftercare for Indiana Through Mentoring, or the AIM program, launched in 1996 at the Plainfield Juvenile Correction Facility. His program pairs juvenile offenders with college students and community volunteers who serve as mentors, offering advice on jobs, health, education, social skills, and money management. The AIM program is an excellent example of research and how that can be translated directly into practice. I saw Dr. Dura last summer at the Summer Institute at Youth Mentoring, and I thought his presentation was fantastic and should really be shared broadly. We're thrilled to do just that today and to have him here with us. Welcome, Roger.
Thanks.
At this point, let's begin. Michael, will you take it away?
Yeah, thank you, Celeste. Roger, first of all, thank you very much for joining us today and taking some time to kind of share your wisdom on this topic with the broader field. I also saw you speak at the Summer Institute on Youth Mentoring this past year, and I came away very impressed with a couple of things. One was the way in which you were integrating mentoring into kind of this broader set of reentry services, and also the tips that you had for the mentors doing the work with the young people. So kind of as a starting point so people can get a little bit more familiar with what AIM is all about, maybe you just tell us a little bit about the AIM model and about how you weave the mentoring relationships into these other services and things that the kids are doing.
Okay, sure. So we started off, we were trying to put together a reentry program. And I wanted to do a program that college students were involved in providing the services. And so we modeled the program after a program up at Michigan State that was working with kids in a diversion program. So I thought that model could work, on the back end of the system too. And so I think it's interesting to emphasize that we started off trying to do, our focus was to do reentry, and because we were going to use college students, we tried to figure out what their role would be and what we would call their role, and so we settled on mentor as the role. But at the time, this was '95 where we were designing the program, and we still didn't have research out there that was saying that mentoring, actually made a difference. So I knew I wanted the students to have a role. I knew that I wanted this to be part of their education, but it wasn't just a mentoring program. And we did it as an experiment. So we tracked the results, and we found that the kids who were in our program, and the model was that while they were still incarcerated, the mentors worked together with them in a group and provided some life skills instruction and helped them put together a plan so that when they were getting out, they already had things in place that they were going to be working towards. They had set some goals, they had identified resources in the community, the kinds of things that we thought were going to be critical. We had another group that we provided the same services for, but when they got out, they didn't have a mentor working with them. So then our model was, the full model was that the kids who got out had a mentor that would work one-on-one with them, continuing for, up to, and then we had a control group that just kids who were not, didn't access any services from our program. They weren't eligible, and so we tracked all three groups, and what we found over 4 years after their release was that the kids who had the mentoring did dramatically better in terms of their long-term success. And so it was interesting on several fronts because number one, the mentoring really was only in place that first year, but even 4 years out, there was a significant difference. So it seems like mentoring really set these kids up for long-term success. It was a little bit unexpected. I mean, I thought, having designed the program, that it was going to be about the things we did up front before they got out that were going to make the difference. So I didn't expect there to be a big difference between the two groups, the group that had mentors and the groups that we worked with before they got out, but they didn't have their own personal mentor. And but in fact, that wasn't the case. The kids that had the mentors did much better over the long term. And so there was something about mentoring that seemed to make a difference. And so we really took a long time after that trying to figure out what it was about mentoring and how we could prepare the mentors to do the best job working with, probably one of the more difficult populations of young people, because these were kids who made it to the deepest part of the juvenile justice system and were going to be coming back after, some of them, after years. They had been in an institution for several years. So that was kind of the idea. And so over time, as we developed this and continued to track the results, we found that continued to, set these kids up for success and over the long term. And we could show, too, that because incarceration for juveniles is so expensive that a pretty modest investment, mentoring's a relatively inexpensive model, we could, for every 100 kids that we served, we could save the state $1.3 million. So that was so it was a pretty encouraging model, and so we ended up expanding this program statewide, and then we've even had it replicated in a couple of other states too over the years.
Great. Well, yeah, I mean, certainly those return on investment numbers should probably perk the ears of any funders or policy people we have joining us today. And I think one of the keys, in your presentation that I saw that kind of, I think, spurred this this change in these young people was you talked a lot about the idea of transformative mentoring, and you seem to be aiming really high with what you wanted these mentoring relationships to achieve. So could you tell folks a little bit about what you meant by that transformative approach to mentoring?
Sure. I think that because mentoring for us was a deliberate component in a reentry program. I mean, for us, there's always a benefit when kids, have a relationship with a positive adult role model. But really for us, we wanted this to be more than just that relationship. This was about putting them on track for a more productive, more positive future. And so it became clear to me, as over time, as we really watched the program develop, that many people didn't expect very much of these kids because the frame of reference was, would they continue to stay out of prison, right? So they wouldn't become an adult that's in and out of prison. And so I learned pretty early on that if that's our standard, then really small things become impressive, right? And so I thought that, but there's no reason that these kids weren't capable of, just like any other adolescent, of, serious, outcome, positive outcomes. So we created a vision statement for our program that we were molding great men and women, which then made anything possible, right? Nothing was off the table. And then we trained our mentors explicitly to, so that they understood the focus was on trying to help these kids, change the trajectory of their future so that it was for more positive. So when I talk about transformative mentoring, I think when the mentor understands that mentoring here is sort of a process where we're helping these kids, envision and even plan for and put things in place for a more positive future. So I feel like we ask more than a traditional mentoring or sort of a big brother program where where the goal is really to create the meaningful relationship in and of itself is the outcome. Ours is, the relationship which then we believe facilitates the greater outcome, which is that they're a productive, engaged adult citizen.
That's great. I mean, I think it's, just even crafting that kind of vision statement for, I could see how that kind of set the tenor for everything else that you did in working with those young people. And one of the things that I've heard you talk about before is kind of some of the principles behind what transformative mentoring looks like, and some of the things that you do in those group sessions and even one-on-one with mentors. And you talked about something called targeted mind growth. Explain for folks a little bit kind of what that concept means and how it looks in those relationships.
Okay, sure. Actually, targeted mind growth is a concept that comes from a book written by Mel Levine. The book's called Ready or Not, Here Life Comes. And it's a fantastic book. I encourage people all the time to grab themselves a copy and look at it. It's written for educators, and it's really about how do we prepare kids for their adult work life, which is relevant to all of us working with young people in the system, because we have the same goal. I mean, whether these kids go back to school full-time and finish high school in a traditional way or not, they're still hopefully going to work in a career as adults. And so there's lots of good things there. But one of the things that he talks about is this notion of targeted mind growth, which is really about teaching brain functions and then helping the kids understand, so they can name it. Because one of the things that, everybody has to do is they're going to have to be able to talk about themselves and talk about, we were asked on job interviews, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? And so when kids can talk about, I'm good at making decisions, I'm good at setting priorities, I'm good at brainstorming, those are things that people are going to take notice of. And so part of the targeted mind growth is that we teach those skills and we name them and we demonstrate them and then help the kids practice those, and so that they're then becoming more aware of the abilities that they have, the skills that they have that can be where they can make a contribution. And this notion of targeted mind growth is helping kids think about the way that they think. And so if we think about how do we learn how to make decisions or how to solve problems, which are two key skills. I always say if these kids were good at solving problems and making decisions, they wouldn't be in trouble. They do the right thing. And so, but those aren't innate skills in human beings, and we learn those either through trial and error or we learn them by watching other people and learning from them. And so, usually if you think about how long you're going to have them in your program, we don't really have the amount of time we need to let these kids sort of learn from trial and error, but we could use other people's lives and other people's examples and help the kids think about, well, what do you think about the way they made choices, or they made decisions, or and what would you have done differently, and how could the outcome have been different? And so I challenge people to think about where can we find these kinds of biographies and stories, and there's lots of them out there, and some that are quite interesting to kids, that they'll be engaged in in thinking through that. And so that's a way to sort of simulate that process of learning those skills when we don't have the luxury of having years for them to kind of work through it on their own through trial and error.
Sure. So I want to stop for just a second here and ask Sarah if we've got any participant questions that have come through. And I just also want to encourage all of our attendees to type your questions over there in that questions panel. We certainly want to hear kind of what you're interested in picking Roger's brain today. Sarah, do we have anything coming through yet?
Well, Mike, we have a couple questions. I think one will be covered a little bit later, maybe in talking about training mentors.
Sure.
But there's also a question about exactly where is this program located, and what's the reach? Are you expanding into other states, or is it only just one? Is it just in your particular area, your state?
Okay. So we're located in Indiana. Our home base is Indianapolis, Indiana, and we serve kids in all the juvenile facilities in the state, and going back to several communities across the state. We do have, the director of the program, Joanne Halfridge, has developed an affiliate program that she's going to be rolling out, and so the idea is that other programs could adopt the AIM model and get support, and to be able to implement it with fidelity and put those things in place. And so we're theoretically it can go anywhere. There's a training institute, and so they have, and again you could check with Joanne or check out the website and find out when they have future trainings coming up. And so they talk also there about how to design the program and the pieces that would be in place for the model.
Great, thank you.
Mike, can I jump in? Can I jump in with one more question that I don't think is on your list? But we have some great questions coming in, and there's some questions about duration. Stacy is asking, what period of time did the mentors work with these youth when it seemed to start making a difference? And Rhoda also adds, did any of the mentors continue contact with the youth after the formal mentoring ended? Maybe you could address both of those at the same time, please.
Sure. So ideally, we prefer to have at least 90 days contact with the young people before their release, and that involves weekly contact between the young person and the program, ideally between the young person and their mentor, although depending on, we're in a state where there actually aren't any juvenile correctional facilities right in the central part of the state where the mentors are based, and so the mentors are not available to go out several times a week to the facilities. But so the idea is that they're developing the relationship with the program and the mentor prior to their release. That's critical, actually. I think if the kids get out first and then you try to connect them with the mentoring, that can be really challenging. But if they're already connected, the relationship means something to them before they get out, they're much more likely to continue working in the program. And the idea is that we would provide, we would ask the mentor for a one-year commitment. And the young person, we're hoping they're going to stay involved that long too. It turns out that once the kids are released, that they tend not to be on probation sometimes more than 4 to 6 months. And so once they're off supervision, then it really is just up to them whether they want to continue. We do have many young people who've continued working with their mentors or having a relationship with their mentors for years afterwards. So I can tell you that I'm in contact with kids that I've mentored over the years who are now close to 30 years old. And so I think that's ideally what's going to happen, is the relationship will become something that just continues on beyond the life of the program. We don't often know where that's happening or not. I'll run into people or I'll hear people say, oh, so-and-so's still working with their mentor, and we had no idea, because once their formal commitment is completed, it's challenging to keep them, for the mentors to continue to keep us up to date if they're not connected in a formal way to the program.
Great. Well, thank you, Roger. So let's go ahead and just start talking about the training and the preparation you provide your mentors. It sounds like there's a lot of people having questions around that topic. I was pretty struck by the level of kind of commitment you were looking for from your mentors, and it seemed like you put a lot of effort into kind of preparing them for what is bound to be a challenging role at times. So if you could tell folks a little bit about how you prepared AIM mentors and the types of things you tried to build up in terms of their skills.
Sure. So I'm a big proponent of training. I think that if we think about, and in our program, we only work with adult mentors. So we don't in our program use teenagers as peer mentors. But if we think about how adults learn, they don't learn best by doing something quickly, having them read something, and then sending them out on their way. And one of the things that I've seen over and over again, and this will all of you will will recognize this yourself with your own mentors, is that most people, even people who honestly really, are doing this for all the right reasons, they don't come with sort of the skill set already sort of finely tuned for this. So, one of the important skills is that they are a good listener, but oftentimes we find that mentors feel like they have so much to share that they can't wait to start, conveying all the information they have, and so they're not even listening, so they're doing a lot of the talking, and that's not the best way to communicate with kids. Kids, we think that kids will care about what you have to say once they've decided that you care about them, but that's a process that happens over time. And so if that's the way it starts, oftentimes the kids have already sort of checked out of that relationship. And so we really coach the mentors and try to get them to understand about communication skills. And the best way to learn those is hands-on, kind of, doing role plays and letting them practice that. And so that takes a while. And so we ask our mentors to do 6 hours of training. And that often happens it can happen all in one day on a Saturday, or 2 blocks of 3 hours, which there's much to recommend that too, because they can go away and think about what they've been, what they learned the first time and come back, and so then even builds on that. But that's and programs will say, oh, that's a lot of time. Our volunteers can't invest that much time. But my experience has been that if we start off being flexible at the beginning and letting the mentor say, well, I'll come for an hour, then they want to be flexible about everything all the way through, and you realize at some point they're not even really serving the kids in the way that you hope they are. And so I'm a strong proponent that you set the bar high at the beginning. You hold them to it. They have to come for the entire training, and then I think their commitment is built in. They've made that commitment, and it helps too to have the refreshers along the way too, and getting them to come back together and talking about it and checking in with them too, because adults take this personal. We try to teach them, don't take it personal, but they take it hard if it doesn't feel like the relationship's really coming together, and so you have to prepare them for that. So I talk about, we use a process called inoculation. So the best way to kind of describe this, so if you say to somebody, well, I have a stupid question to ask, right? Well, if somebody says that to you, you're not ever going to say back to them, that was a really stupid question, right? Because they said, I have a stupid question to ask, it inoculates you. You're going to say, in fact, a lot of times we'll say, oh, that's not a stupid question, or, oh, no, that's a good question. And so the same thing with when we're training mentors. If we tell them, here's what the kids are going to do to kind of keep you at arm's length, and when they do these things, you're going to want to quit. You're going to want to give up. Then when those things happen, which invariably they will, then the mentors are, they're already prepared. Well, I'm not going to quit for this reason. They told me this would happen, and so I'm going to, and you can help them think about what's your plan going to be. When they change their number or the number's disconnected, how are you going to get in touch with them? Think about those things ahead of time, up front, and even make them part of the discussions that the mentors will have with the young people. We really encourage them while the young person is still captive at the facility. Talk through all of these. If you move and I don't know where you are, who's a relative of yours that will always know where you're going to be, that I can contact, that you can tell them it's okay if my mentor calls you, you tell them where I am. And get those things in place ahead of time before the situations come up. And then I think the mentors feel much better. And if you provide the ongoing support, our experience was that the mentors stay longer and the relationships have a better chance of becoming meaningful relationships.
Cool. Yeah. I think it's interesting that you're, preparing the mentors both kind of emotionally for some of the, tricks and things that the young people will do to kind of, push back on this relationship, but also preparing them for kind of those almost structural problems around, maintaining contact and the kids moving around and having to miss meetings, and I think that's a great strategy for kind of allaying some of that frustration down the road from your mentors. Just kind of a general.
Mike, can I jump in?
Sure, go ahead.
We've got this avalanche of great questions here.
How about it?
So just kind of in what we've been talking about, more specifically, people are really interested in knowing some real concrete, tangible answers about training. Some people are saying 6 hours sounds like it's enough. Some people are saying, how can that be enough, especially given the population for your program, population of mentees. But here's some, maybe you can talk a little bit about that. And someone is asking, let's see, it's Ray is asking, do you have curriculum developed for targeted mind growth? How are mentors trained to engage youth in this material? And where's the other one? Do you use any training in the area of motivational interviewing in your training of adult mentors? And Ray also asked, and that last question was from, we have quite a few questions from Ray, is also asking about what are the responsivity principles you use to match mentee with mentor?
Okay.
That's a lot of questions, I know.
It is.
So
remind me if I forget any of them. Okay. So I think so. In terms of 6 hours, I would say 6 hours is the bare minimum. And I would tell you, when I'm the trainer, I never feel like I had enough time to do everything I needed to do. I think the key topics that you want to make sure that you cover in a training are, some information about the population that you're serving. And I think it's important that your mentors understand sort of what we know about normal adolescent development, right? Because some of the challenges they're going to have are things that come with any adolescent that they're going to work with. And so for them to understand what that is, and then to understand how adolescent development looks for kids that don't have sort of normal lives, and maybe trauma, have experienced trauma, or have other issues that aggravate some of those challenges. Then I think there's a huge part that you do where you really talk about the communication skills and do role playing. I like to bring mentors in and some of the young people in to talk with them, because a lot of times new mentors won't even be able to imagine what they could possibly do. What could we do? What activities would be good? And so when the mentors that are already serving come in with the young people that they're working with, and they talk together about the things they do, then it just seems easy, right? And part of it too is, adults sometimes will have images in their mind of what these kids are going to look like. And in the population that we serve, sometimes people have pretty scary images of who these kids are. But when you meet the kids, they seem like regular kids, and you think, oh, I can work with that kid, because any of the kids that are going to come to your training are going to make a good impression. So I think it's useful to do all of that in the training. It just kind of, makes it, puts it in real life for them. And so in terms of the curriculum for the targeted mind growth, if you get a copy of the book, Ready or Not, Here Life Comes, it lays out pretty detailed. So we just pulled activities right from the book. And it's a book that, I'll tell you, if you check on Amazon, there's almost always used copies of the book that you can get for less than $1. And so we keep a stack of them so that the mentors can borrow them and use them, and they can work together to create activities. So there's lots of good examples right in there that you can customize those too for the kids based on the kids' interests as well. Let's see. Okay, I sort of forgot the rest of the questions.
Well, I believe the
there was one question about motivational interviewing.
Oh, okay. I would say that we use we don't call it, so we don't say we're going to teach you motivational interviewing, but some of the way that we talk about how do you ask questions, so we use some of the principles, but it's not, we don't actually call it motivational interviewing. So I would say the answer is probably no, but I would say it's informed by sort of the best principles of motivational interviewing. But
okay,
it could certainly work. I mean, it could certainly work, and I would never tell you that our model is the only model out there for training. And so, I think if you have somebody who is very comfortable training lay people in how to use motivational interviewing, I think it's a good idea to do that.
Okay, thank you. Mike, I'll turn it back over to you.
Sure. Well, Sarah, was there also a question there about how they matched particular
Oh, yeah.
students?
Yes, yes, and there had been some earlier questions about matching, so we would love it
Yeah.
if you could talk a little bit about that, please.
Sure. So we actually sort of, our matching process evolved over time because I'll tell you, it's hard to do with some type of an instrument where you gather information from the kids and then gather information from the adults and try to match them. So what we did, and this was partly our effort to have the kids continue to be involved in the program over time too, was we created teams of mentors. And so so there would be, and the mentors that have been around for a while could elevate and become the team leaders. And so as mentors joined the program, they would join the teams, and the kids would be assigned to the teams. And actually, it was a little bit of, the teams would sort of negotiate with each other. We want this kid, lives in this part of town, or this kid wants to go to college, and we work really well with those kids. So they would negotiate. The rule was every kid had to be part of a team, and every team had to have some of those kids that were the really needy kids that would challenge the the best mentors, and then it was up to the team to figure out how they were going to pair off one-on-one mentors to the young people. And so what we would encourage them to do, and what we almost always did, was the mentors could come and interact with the kids as part of the life skills groups and be involved in the activities with the groups before they actually were, we'd say, you're going to be paired with this young person. And then what we could see then was where some of the natural sort of affinities were. And so, the mentors would say, well, I think I would work really well with this kid or this kid, or a kid would say, could that person be my mentor? And so then there's a little bit of natural selection going on there too, which we know from the research makes for stronger relationships when it happens. And so for us, that served us well. The other thing that it does, because we work with the teams, is that if for some reason a mentor had to leave the program or was moving away, or if a young person dropped out of the program, then we didn't just lose both of them, because the mentor already knew some of the other kids on the team and could pick somebody else up, or one of the other mentors on the team could say, well, I've got a good relationship with this young person, so I'll be his new mentor. And so we went from really struggling to keep kids engaged when there were transitions like that to almost not losing any kids in the program because they were connected too. So the other thing, another principle that I've learned over time is that it helps if your mentors and your young people feel like they're part of a program, right? Not just I have a mentor or I'm a mentor, but I'm part of this bigger initiative. Because then they don't feel like they're by themselves, so they're part of a bigger group, and then they kind of come together. So that's how we use. I don't know if that's specific enough for people to answer all your questions, but so that I always recommend that approach. If you can somehow build in an ability to see the mentors interact with the young people first before you do the matching, I think that helps you get more of the meaningful connections among the mentors that we might sometimes that we don't do when we just try to do it based on information we gathered independently earlier before they met each other.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. I think that's excellent advice. I've known a number of programs working with youth with a lot of risk factors that definitely try and build in that kind of group interaction time. I've had many of those coordinators say it, and you mentioned this, it builds kind of trust of the program. The mentors get to see what the program's about, and kind of everyone gets to kind of get their feet wet, and it kind of builds some trust with all parties involved. And that kind of leads into something else I wanted to talk about, and that's trust at kind of the one-on-one relationship level. Jean Rhodes, her model of mentoring, has kind of these concepts of mutuality, empathy, and trust at the core of a good mentoring relationship. But I don't need to tell you, I think youth in a program like AIM often have a hard time trusting new adults in their life. So how do you train your mentors to build that trust in working with the young people?
Okay. Kind of one of the interesting things that we realize about the people who come to do the work of mentoring is they start off, trusting unconditionally, and the young people start off trusting not at all. And somehow, when the relationship works, they meet somewhere in the middle, right? The adults come to realize you can't trust everything, and the young people come to understand that you can trust. That not every adult is going to let you down. So I think trust is about helping the adults think about how they're going to create a relationship of mutual respect. And I find a lot of times adults want to start from a position of, well, here's my rules and my principles and my values, and I think that's the wrong sort of strategy to lead with, because kids are wary of that, and they've heard from adults and authority figures their whole life, about how they don't measure up to standards and certain things. And so I think it's important that adults are not judgmental in the way that they interact. I think that kids bring a lot of baggage with them. There's lots of things in their past that it's helpful to know those things to understand who the kids are, but it's not critical, right? And so I think kids, as they come to feel comfortable, they open up and they share those things. But a lot of times adults want to know all that up front, and I think it can shape the relationship. And so I think if it needs to be conveyed to the mentors, it should be conveyed by the program, and it shouldn't be something that the kids put on the spot to have to tell their story and what they've done. Initially, that should be done when they're comfortable doing it. I think it's really important too that when mentors are working with kids involved in the system, that we strike a balance between what their professional, what are sort of the professional responsibilities when we work with kids that are system involved, and how do we allow this adult to have a relationship with the young person where the young person feels like what I say, this person can be held in confidence. And it's a tricky line to follow. I think there's certain things that, bottom line, you can't keep this to yourself, right? So if the kids say they're thinking of killing themselves, or they're going to harm somebody else, or if there's some allegation of child abuse, either on the, where they're the victim or they are the perpetrator, that our mentors have to be trained that information has to be shared with the program staff immediately. But beyond that, I would argue that the rest of what the kids would want to talk about or could come up, that's something that the mentor should be, at least have the illusion that that's between the two of them, right? You may encourage your mentors to come and talk to the staff of the program so they work through for themselves, what do I do with this, or how can we work with this young person? But then it's important that the staff don't just turn right around and go back to the young person and say, your mentor just told me, X, because then what you've done is set up the relationship to not have any value for the young person. So that's something I think that has to be worked through. I think that it's important to train the mentors to be able to empathize with the young people, and to do it without, sort of, I don't know, so the kids don't feel like, the mentor's being condescending, or that the mentor's getting too emotionally involved too. And so I think some of that is by teaching them, these are some of the challenging situations that these kids are going through, and how do you help the mentor come to be aware of those, but without getting caught up in the drama of, because some kids really are about the drama, right? And so they'll do, and if they find that they're sort of got the mentor on the hook, they'll just keep feeding the story and keeping them engaged, and that's not the way that we build healthy relationships. And so being able to just sort of take that information in without sort of reacting, and then and talking through with the kid, how do you think you can handle that, or what do you wish you had done differently, or what do you want to do with that information, where could we look for some assistance, right? And then the last thing I would say about trust, and I say this to everybody when I train, is trust is a bit of an overrated concept. I think sometimes we damage relationships by focusing too much on trust. I think it's a relative concept, right? Some kids, I think, honestly believe what they say. And for us to invest the time and energy to catch them in a lie or catch them in a factual inaccuracy, I think it's showing them that you're not really invested in them as a person. And so I think sometimes we just kind of have to be with the kids where they're at and their own perception, right? So, and you take it with a grain of salt, right? And I think this works better for adults that are more mature. I think they're just better at, not taking everything the kids say and, and really over analyzing what they say. But so I encourage adults to just kind of relax about that and not make that the issue, because it's, kids are wary of that and they're nervous that you're going to judge them, and so if you make it about judging, then I think it's a lose-lose situation.
Great advice, Roger. Sarah, how are we doing on participant questions? Anything interesting bubbling up?
Absolutely. The avalanche continues, so I'll do my best here. We do have a comment from Ray, who says, I completely share Roger's goals of empathy, trust, and mutuality in a mentoring relationship, along with a focus on relationship building. But translating that into practice takes considerable feedback-based experiential training. So it's interesting, there's a couple different viewpoints coming up where people seem to be saying, that the training that you're describing sounds like it's not enough, and some people are saying, well, that seems like it's too much. So I know you talked about your training, and there are also some questions around the real specific population of young people you're working with. So maybe can you comment a little bit about that in terms of how you've designed and developed your training to meet the needs of the youth that you're working with?
Okay,
Does
sure.
that make sense?
It does. It does make sense. So I think it's good in the training, I think a critical piece of your training needs to be about the kids that you serve, right? So what special issues do they bring by virtue of, who they are and what their experiences have been? That's really important to know. It's important for new mentors to understand how the previous experiences these kids have had, how they shape their perspective, how they shape their, issues. There was a question earlier about responsivity that I didn't get to, but I'm reminded of that now. So when we think about responsivity issues, that's something we need to really help the mentors come to understand. What that looks like for the young people. I think that's why I would bring the young people in and let the young people talk to I would say too, training. I think there's a difference between training and orientation, and so I think there's a significant amount of training that needs to be done up front before you let a mentor work with a young person, because I think if you don't prepare them well, then we risk that the relationship doesn't actually take off. But I think training, and so I think however you can keep your mentors engaged in ongoing kind of in-service training, or even to discuss, right? So even letting them come back together and talking about what's going on. I mean, how's it going? They can learn from each other. And again, this is where if your program has a way to, fund like group or get passes for group kinds of events, that's another way that mentors can come together and develop some relationships amongst themselves so that they serve as supports for each other too. And I think it's critical. I think somebody from your program on the staff needs to have one-on-one ongoing contact with the mentors, just to check in and see how things are going and to talk through some of those things as they come up. So I think of that also as part of training, right? So I think we probably can't do everything we need to do right in a orientation type training at the front, but it has to be an ongoing part of what you do, because the kids that we're working with, I mean, if you're working with kids that are involved in the system, it can be challenging, right? Those kids may be damaged, and they've had experiences with adults where they feel like they don't want to trust adults. So to work through that for an adult who doesn't know what it's like to think like that takes a little bit of time and patience and support and all those things that the staff of your program can provide.
Do you do a lot of role-playing in your training, Roger? Do you give mentors a chance to kind of get themselves in some situations and kind of see how they react to it and kind of work with them in that way?
Yes. So we do lots of roles. We do demonstrations. We do, and then we have, and this is one of the activities we use the young people for, is have the new mentors do some, asking questions. So we really teach them how to ask questions as the form of communication, right? Rather than just telling them things, ask questions. And then we let the kids give them feedback about, did you feel like they were listening to you? And how did it feel like when they were, asking the questions? So, and they work together, and then we do lots of discussion about that too, and they watch each other doing that. So they not only get to experience it themselves, but they get to see how when somebody else did this, here's how it went. And so yeah, I think that's really important to do as much hands-on as you can, because I think that's the best way for people to learn.
Great.
This is April. One of the benefits of being a part of this partnership is I can jump in and ask a question. But we talked a little bit at the National Mentoring Summit about mentor training, and so I just wanted to ask if there's, we talk about sharing about the population served or what mentors need to know about this population, but can you say a little bit about, what can be generalized and what can't, or can you share too much? I love the idea of letting the young people speak for themselves and they can inform the mentors, but something about setting mentors up from the beginning with, we want it to be realistic, but also do you run the risk of it being too deficit-based and not focused enough on their potential or positive youth development or the things that mentors can actually control?
Well, so I guess I would say first off, I didn't say this earlier, but having a focus on positive youth development is really critical. And so I think we don't want to come at this from a deficit-based perspective. And so it's not just about what's wrong with these kids, right, or what the problems have been. But I think that's important to understand where they're at now currently. But I think what we want the mentors to do is to build from their strengths. Right? So the mentors are not, and I think we have to help the mentors define their role too. You're not a therapist, you're not a social worker, you're not a case manager, you are a support system. And you can help connect them to these other resources, but you're a sounding board, you're a friend, you're somebody that is going to, be there to help translate what the other adults are saying in their life. And so I think, yeah, I mean, in terms of can we say too much or I think we have to be careful when at the beginning that we don't scare people off, right? That we put it in, so that they're informed, but not that we haven't sort of horrified them in the process too. And that's why I think, again, the kids that are going to come, would make a good impression. And would make people excited, because they're, the kids that you really struggle with, or that you would meet them and think there's no way I can work with this population, they're not going to come to your training, and and they're not going to stand up in front of a group of adults and talk about how mentoring has changed their life. The kids that will do that are gonna will make a good impression, and they'll give people a vision of what it could look like when it goes well, and they say things like, I just really want somebody to listen to me, right? I want someone that I can call and tell them what's going on, and they'll just listen. So they'll make it very basic kinds of things so that mentors understand too. It's not that I bought them something, or that that I came up with some really brilliant activity. It was just that I did the basic kinds of just being there and showing just regard for them as a human that matters to the kids. And I think that's an important message for mentors to understand. Sometimes I think we make it too complicated. It doesn't need to be complicated. It's as simple as spending time together and having a conversation. Kids often will say when they meet somebody that sits and listens to them, that was the first time ever in their life that an adult actually listened to what they had to say. If you think about that, that's really a profound thing to realize, but so many of the kids that we work with, that's their experience. Adults don't listen, don't really care what they have to say, and so the mentor can change all that for them by just doing simple things.
So we have a couple more questions, Mike, if I can jump in with a few more. So maybe if you can just, some people are looking for a little clarification with your mentors. if you can describe specifically if the college students, if there's some kind of, if they are totally volunteers, if you use any kind of employees as mentors, if there's stipends involved, how that works when people's schedules changes, and if there's any, at any point do you cut ties with a mentor because of non-responsiveness? I know that was a lot of questions again.
That's
so
okay.
Answer what you think is good.
Yes to every one of those. So,
Okay.
yeah. So, well, so let me say a little bit about the college students as mentors. You know, college students are sort of a mixed bag. I think by themselves, if you just went out and recruited college students and they weren't part of a structured program, you are likely to be disappointed. You know, college students have lots of things that they're sort of trying to do, and they're not very dependable sometimes. They, you know, want to go away at spring break. They want to go away sometimes for weeks in between semesters. They want to go away for the whole summer sometimes. Sometimes when, you know, when they graduate, they move away. And so, you know, there's those issues that don't make them ideal mentors. But I would say that if you can have a partnership with somebody at the university, a faculty member, that is willing to create, so what I did was I had a service learning class, it's what it's called, service learning, and the students had to come every week, and they were required to spend 8 hours outside of class every week doing mentoring. So if you think about it, a community volunteer who might be a fantastic mentor isn't going to give you 8 hours of their time a week generally. So a student that is dedicated for that long, over the course of a year, provides you with some quality time, and they could probably work with more than one young person at a time. In fact, generally they do, right? Most kids don't need 8 hours of one mentor's time in a week. But the other thing is that because they come to class every week, we have built in that structured, you know, reflection and retraining and the stuff that goes on. And so over time, they can become fantastic mentors when you may really struggle to get volunteers from the community to keep coming in, you know, enough so that you can work through some of the issues that come up. So I think if you can do it in a partnership where there's a structure involved and they're earning credit, I think that's when I think college students can be really an asset to a program. The other thing that college students can do is when these kids meet a college student, for the first time for many of them, it becomes obvious to them that they could go to college too. It's interesting how that happens, but some of them have never known anybody that went to college. So they meet a kid who's in college and they think, wow, I could go to college too. So connecting them with, you know, what they could do in the future, I think that's a great strategy. So in terms of other kinds of, but I will tell you that we can't get enough college students. So most of our mentors are not college students. They come from the community. We've used AmeriCorps members for years as mentors, and so they do get an allowance, a stipend, if you will, and they also contribute a higher number of hours. So they're sort of staff-like. I mean, technically, AmeriCorps member is not a staff member, but they're, you know, you could think of them as staff. I think when we pay, I'm a little leery of paying mentors to do sort of therapeutic mentoring, because I think the skill set that's involved there when you train somebody to really do those kinds of behavioral, then I think we lose the sort of the relationship piece, right? Because now it becomes focused on I'm paying attention to, you know, all of these, you know, red flags and things, rather than just having a comfortable relationship where, you know, you can talk to me about stuff, or I can, you know, take you to a job interview or practice, you know, get you ready for it, kind of thing. So I'm a little, you know, leery of that. When we define their role to have to be more than the mentor, but I think it can, you know, I think it can work. Those different. I think staff can be. In fact, when I do presentations about mentoring, even to professionals, I always end with encouraging people to be mentor-like. Even if your role is not a formal mentor, you should be mentor-like in the way that you interact with kids, because that's really a way to get kids to respond, and it just it lets kids believe that they're valued, and it treats them in a way that adults typically don't treat kids. So I encourage that. And then absolutely, if you have mentors that are just, I mean, not everybody is cut out to be a mentor. Not everybody comes to mentoring for the right reasons, and you absolutely have to protect the kids in your program. So I think that you should always have a process in place where sometimes we just have to say, you're just not going to be able to be a mentor in this program. You should have really careful screening up front, but I think just along the way, some people, just can't seem to follow the rules, or or have really a lot of trouble keeping the boundaries, right? So you really have to help your mentors understand what are the healthy boundaries, because the kids that we work with, if there's system involved, they live lives where there are no boundaries, right? They don't have boundaries with adults, and those aren't healthy relationships. And so our mentors really have to be prepared to not, if a kid runs away, the answer cannot be that the mentor takes them into their house. And the mentor has to know that up front, that, this can never be. You can't have them sleeping over at your house. You're not going to take them out of town on a trip. These are the, as a mentor in this program, these are the rules and the boundaries. And if they won't follow that, they can't be a mentor in your program. You have to be prepared to make those decisions.
Sarah, anything else in terms of participant questions coming in?
Absolutely. We have, I'm seeing kind of a couple clusters that maybe we can try to squeeze in the last bit of our webinar. The first, a lot of people have questions and have been submitting questions around how do you involve families? What's the role of the parent or guardian in the mentoring relationship? Excuse me. And what do you do when these parents or guardians make it difficult to support the relationship? And then after that, we have some questions coming in on some evaluation, outcomes, and funding. So we'll save the best for last, I guess.
Okay. So I will say that I'm probably not I'm not a good example of a program that found a way to really incorporate the families in meaningful ways. Part of that has to do with the way that kids come to be in our program, right? We enroll them in the program while they're incarcerated, where they may or may not even have contact with their families at the time. So in our program, the families actually don't really even have a say as to whether the kids can be part of the program. Once they're enrolled, they're part of our program through the court. And so because of that, we have AIM currently is part of the community transition program that it's part of. It's the transition from restrictive placement. There's also a family therapy component to that. So the family is provided with a therapist who does in-home therapy that starts while the young person's incarcerated and continues, and the young person gets services as well from the therapist. Now so they're part of the same agency. So the therapists, they're all master's level therapists, work for the same organization where AIM is housed these days. And so that technically they're part of the same team, but the mentors don't really have regular contact with the therapists, and that they don't, they're not part of, the therapist isn't involved in the activities that the mentors do with the young people. So we know that the family is getting services, and I would say that's critical for the family, because a lot of times the families have needs that if they're not getting met, the kids are still living in an environment where they can't thrive. And so we want to try to do something about that. I would encourage all programs to think about how to have sort of healthy connections with the families, because the families can be in the way, can keep the kids from being able to participate. Certainly when kids are in foster care, or kids, children of prisoners, where there's a guardian that may or may not be, sort of a parent or a relative, it can become complicated in terms of how much access the mentor has to the young people. So, it's definitely a very serious issue, but it's not something that I would say you could look to us and see, wow, they're a best practice model. So sorry, I can't speak better to that question. In terms of, is there a specific question about funding and outcome evaluation?
Yes,
or
we have a couple. Yes, we have a couple questions. What kind of data do you have on outcomes? And from Ray, and let's see, where's the other one? This is fantastic, having so many questions that I can't find the ones that I was talking about. What type of costs are there in making your programs go? Where does funding come from? How are the staff of, if it comes from the juvenile justice system, how are the staff of that facility engaged or not in your program? So a couple of those questions.
Okay, all right. So in terms of outcomes, and I would encourage all programs to really think carefully about what you want to be able to say about your program. Because, for us, working as part of the juvenile justice system, of course, everyone's interested in, do the kids get back in trouble? But if we let others define what the outcomes are for us, then oftentimes they make the decision that the program isn't doing as well. So I would say to you that, sure, we have to be pay attention to the public safety outcomes, like did they get rearrested, did they, get re-incarcerated. But I would tell you that even if the kids are staying out of trouble, if they're not working for a living and they're living on the streets or they're involved with drugs and alcohol, I wouldn't call that a success. So we also track, are they working? Did they have a job within 30 days? Are they re-enrolled in a school or some kind of education program? And we'll track. We monitor their progress on their goals. So if they say one of their goals is, that they want to be able to start saving money, then we'll keep track of how are they doing with that, and we, ask the mentor to report on that too. So I think the sky's the limit, right? But whatever you put in place, you want to have a mechanism for how you can capture that data and keep it in a way that you can report on it. If someone were to ask you, how's that going? In terms of the I lost your other question about. You want to remind me?
Oh, how the program is supported, if any funding comes from through the juvenile justice system, and if any staff of the facility are engaged with your program.
Yeah. So we were fortunate early. So once we had data to show, so at the beginning, for the first several years, everybody said, "Oh, what a nice idea," but nobody would give us money. So we did it sort of, volunteers, small little grants from the university. But then when we had data to show that the program was making a difference, then the state entered into a contract with us. So the Department of Correction, which is where the kids in our state, Department of Correction does the adults and the juveniles. And so we had a contract with them. We had to agree to serve kids in every facility, which probably pushed our program to ramp up faster than we were ready at the time. But we had a pretty large contract with them every year, so they supported us in terms of that. We have currently, the program has 2 Second Chance Act grants, so we've been fortunate in that regard too. There's the federal block grants that come to the state, the Title II funds, the JBIG funds. Those can also be looked at, and then local faith-based organizations give small grants out too, as well. So I mentioned we had an AmeriCorps program for 8 years, so that's another way that we were able to have sort of enough people so that we had people stationed in each correctional facility. At the biggest point, we served kids in 9 facilities across the state. And then in terms of, I think that's something. It's an ongoing challenge to figure out where that funding can come from. In terms of the staff at the facility, that's a challenge because there's such high turnover that even if you get things in place and you feel like your procedures are good, invariably the leadership at the facility will change or the staff will change, and you got to start all over again. And so it's a continuous education process of really helping them understand why. I mean, I always tell them, if you don't provide us with access to these kids before they get out, you're setting those kids up to not take advantage of our services. And I think we have to really let them understand what their responsibility is there. So they're not a formal part of our program, but it's always been important for us to keep those relationships as strong as possible and really educate them so they understand how critical it is that that we can have access to the kids to build those relationships.
Great. Thank you very much, Roger. I think we're about up against the end of our allotted time today. So first, I just want to say thank you again to Roger for joining us today and kind of really sharing your wisdom and your experiences and the things you've learned in building and researching AIM. Very, very good stuff. I think I'm going to hand it back over to Celeste now. Celeste?
Great. Thank you, everyone. This has been a fantastic webinar. Before we go, I'd like to remind you that attendees will receive an email, and that email will have a link to the presentation slides. It'll have additional resources and contact information. In particular, there was an article written that's called "It May Be the Missing Piece." It was actually written by Michael Geringer, who was on the line today, and it covers information including Roger's presentation last summer at the Summer Institute for Youth Mentoring. So if you had a question that wasn't answered or you'd like to learn a little bit more not only about his program, but about some other really neat programs that are operating that are serving system or youth who are in systems of care, I'd highly recommend checking out that resource. And again, you'll get that in your inbox, or when you register today, there's also a link to it in that email. Additionally, an online recording of the webinar will be available in a week or so, and that'll be a great resource for anybody who missed out today or didn't get to the beginning of the webinar. And if you could help us by please taking a short 5-question survey while you exit the webinar, we'd appreciate it. Next month, we'll be talking about innovative matching strategies, and so we hope that you'll be able to participate. This webinar collaborative series again is on the 3rd Thursdays of every month, and we are excited to really dive into the idea of matching and to get feedback from you all about what's working in each of your programs. And I'd like to just end today by saying thank you to Roger, and also thank you to Michael, Sarah, and April, and to everyone who's on the line. We hope that this was an interesting and fulfilling webinar, and we hope to see you in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.